Welcome back to a brand new episode of the MMA Beat. It is Thursday, March 16th, 2017. Hello again, everyone. I'm Mario Helwani, back inside our New York City studio, as you can see. 3 deep once again this week. We made a trade, though. We've traded the man in the hat for the man with the beard.
Traded up is what you did.
Well, that's debatable. But welcome back, Luke. We missed you last week.
Thank you.
There he is, back in the saddle, of course, of SiriusXM and MMAfighting.com. And that is Mr. Reliable himself. He will never miss a show. Snowstorm, no snowstorm. Jeff Wagenheim, the man in the shirt, is always here, of course, of the Washington Post. Did you want to say something, Jeff?
No, I'm just coughing.
Just coughing. Okay.
He might die.
Are you going to die on us?
I come even if I'm like, in my sick bed.
Yeah, well, we appreciate
It's
that.
our Cal Ripken.
Yes, exactly, Mr. Reliable. All right, guys, much to discuss as always. This week, I want to start with the Anderson Silva sweepstakes. We saw this kind of play out over around 24 hours earlier this week. You had Kelvin Gastelum get on the mic after his win over Vitor Belfort and say, I want to go on a Legends ass-kicking tour a la his friend Chael Sonnen. I want Anderson Silva in Rio. Rashad Evans saying he wants to fight Anderson Silva. We also had Yoel Romero make the case for a fight against Anderson Silva. In the end, the UFC goes with Gastelum. It's happening June 3rd in Rio, UFC 212. Gastelum versus Anderson Silva, a very interesting fight on that card. Did the UFC get it right, though, when you had all these guys campaigning for a fight against Anderson?
I think, right or wrong, this is not a bad choice. The Rashad one would not have made a lot of sense to me. I can understand why I can understand why all of them called him out, to be honest. That pretty much is a given. But I have some sympathy for Rashad in trying to fix his condition that he's currently stuck in. So I don't bemoan him that, but it just doesn't feel like that would really do a whole lot for the fan base or, frankly, either fighter in that particular case. The one with Kelvin is like, when you mention it's like, okay, Anderson Silva's going to fight Kelvin Gastelum. You're like, what? That doesn't, who? It doesn't sound like it fits together, but really it kind of does, right? He needs to fight somebody who's probably non-Brazilian. They could have done Vitor versus Anderson again, but that's sort of burning, their resources a little bit too heavily, right? I might as well spread them out and have different fights there and do a little bit more with the crowd. So that part I like. They could have done Romero, but Romero, and Kelvin might do this too, but I think there's a feeling that Romero, the fight with that, is not competitive enough to really make it, to really sort of sell it. Mm. The Kelvin one is interesting because he is so, from a frame standpoint, he is so much smaller than Anderson Silva. Again, we'll see how if that really matters come fight day. But it also makes a lot of sense because Yoel Romero is going to be 40 in April. Kelvin Gastelum is 24 years old. If you want to invest star power in someone, it makes a lot more sense to do it. And if you're Kelvin Gastelum, this is an easy call too. And I think it seems to me like the UFC may have suggested to him to call him out, but I don't know for sure. But here's my point: if you're Kelvin Gastelum, there's no one at welterweight you can go and fight right now that is relatively easy and has a huge name. St. Pierre's gone, John Fitch is gone, and was never that big of a name, and Koscheck is gone. He's got the people that made welterweight what it was in that heyday. Yeah. They don't exist anymore, so you can't build off of anything. Middleweight just has these sort of guys, these vagrants, who are really popular and people still want to see. And so it's just a really great call, I think, for him. And ultimately, I think it'll be a pretty good fight.
Yeah, I kind of think that this is the middle ground. I feel like I agree with Luke that the Romero fight would not have been the one to make. The Rashad one would have been interesting if you're Anderson Silva and you're going home to Brazil to fight, maybe, and let's say Vitor Belfort is the promoter, in his brand new, senior circuit of MMA. Maybe the senior circuit of MMA could have Silva versus Rashad. That'd be an interesting fight from that perspective. But if you're the UFC, what does that really do for you? It's not going to build anything for you. But if Kelvin Gastelum goes out there and takes out Anderson Silva in Brazil, yeah, 40-year-old Anderson Silva, but that would be something. So I would agree. I think that's the fight to make.
Do you think that Anderson has finally reached the point in his career where the UFC is going to try to use him to build new stars? Because I don't think they got to, I don't even think the Derek Brunson fight to me felt like a showcase for Anderson, let's be honest. I don't think they were heavily invested in Derek Brunson. But now it kind of feels like they're trying to build Kelvin Gastelum off of Anderson's name. Do you agree?
Well, I don't think that they're making him a sacrificial lamb. If that's, I wouldn't put it that far.
Okay.
But I do think that they're going to say to a guy like Kelvin Gastelum, you want to rise up. Well, Anderson Silva may not be the guy that he used to be, but he's still Anderson Silva. You got to beat that guy.
Are you surprised, Luke, that Kelvin still talks about going down to 170, now 2-0 since going back up to 185? Completely dominated Tim Kennedy, and yes, end of Kennedy's career, long layoff. Completely dominates Belfort, and yes, older, end of his career, one fight left, it seems. And yet he still talks about going down to 170. Why? You're doing well. You're healthy. You don't have to cut a lot of weight. Why does he keep talking? Are you impressed with what he's doing, or do you think that there is a reason why he keeps talking about 170?
Yeah, I think it's a good call. You know, we used to sort of ask, why does Chael Sonnen sort of pick fights with everyone when he's got one in front of him? And it's to give himself options after the fact. And I think this is what he's doing. Look, he went to middleweight a number of times. People forget he fought Nate Marquardt, and then went back to welterweight, and then went back to middleweight again after that 205 disaster.
Both times he was forced to go up.
Correct. But I mean, he was trying to also get back to welterweight, and you know, obviously to very unsuccessful degrees, you know, after what happened at 205. But my point being is, now that he's gone up there, he beat Marquardt, stopped him. Kennedy stopped him. Vitor stopped him. He's like, actually, I'm pretty good up here. This is okay. Let's ride this out as far as I can go. I still think at 24 years old, and I'm sort of speaking as him in the abstract here, but that you can, if you probably. Kelvin, you probably do think with some adjustments you can make 170. You don't want to give up on that dream. You were very competitive with the champion. You only lost via split decision after you didn't make weight that one time. So I just think he feels like, I'm going to ride this out as long as I can for all the reasons of star power. And I think he's way more competitive than he thought he would be, which we'll see if that changes as he gets to the upper echelons of the division. But if it's going to work, it's not broken. No need to fix it.
The problem at 185 right now, as you guys know, is there's this long queue because of the GSP fight. So you've got Romero there, who's patiently waiting, and we'll get to him in a second. You also have Jacare, you got Weidman fighting Mousasi. So you almost have to build him, but build him slowly, because even a win over Anderson is not necessarily going to put him in that title picture. You know what I mean? So you're either...
But isn't that what they're doing with Vitor and Anderson fights? They're building him slowly.
Oh, no, that's why I like it.
Okay,
I think that's why I like it.
Yeah.
You know, if you try to push him too quickly, that he beats someone, you know, originally I said someone like, you know, Weidman Mousasi, but on second thought, I like this fight a lot more because it gives him a high-profile fight, but it also kind of keeps him on that slow track at 185.
Sure.
Now, on the flip side, you have Vitor Belfort, who he thoroughly dominated, and he comes out and says, I got one fight left on my deal. I want to play it out. I want to fight in Rio. My question to you guys is, A, is that too soon after he just was essentially knocked out? That's in, you know, less than 3 months. And B, is there any appetite at this point for a Vitor Belfort fight? Or, you know, it's in Rio, he's a big star there, give him his last fight and then say goodbye. What do you think?
Yeah, I think that, you know, it's always a little bit shaky when we start saying, well, we're going to give this guy one last shot and his one moment of glory. Because what are you going to do there? Are you going to put him in there with somebody who is an easy mark? I mean, there really aren't too many easy marks in the UFC anyway, but are you going to just put him in there with somebody who's below where he's been and just hope for the best? Or are you going to put him in there with someone who's going to be challenging? You know, someone who he'll be hard-pressed to defeat in his own native Brazil. So, I mean, I think it's a slippery slope, but I do think that the guy's put in the time. He's built quite a career. He wants to do this one thing. I think the UFC can do it. They got a possibility for you know, putting him out there. I know that Hector Lombard, you know, made a call out. They're both guys on 3-fight losing streaks. They're both 39 years old, although Vitor will be 40 by the time that fight would happen. You know, why not?
Certainly do not mean to compare end-of-career decisions with nearly the same moral complexity or gravity as end-of-life decisions, except to say trying to navigate the end of a legend's career is prickly and difficult and often no great answers. I think Rio in June is a fine answer, to be honest. I think if they can usher him out of the sport in a realistic way, there are some other middleweight guys he could fight that wouldn't be terrible challenges that might have enough name value. And in any case, this would be for the Brazilian market. Vitor Belfort is super popular there. Give him I hate the word, but give him a gringo to fight, and they might be all ready to rock for it down there. So to me, you know, what is the best answer here? You could make a number of cases about having him wait or whatever the case may be. I think just sort of usher in the end, and these questions will basically resolve themselves.
I actually really like the idea of Anderson versus Vitor too.
I wouldn't have minded it. I just think they wanted to, like, you know.
Vitor himself also said, I want to fight a fellow Brazilian
right.
In my last fight. So now we finally hear from Vitor, okay, the end is near. I have one fight left. I want to play it out in June. What's his legacy at this point?
it's checkered. It really, I mean, there's nothing. I don't know how you can look at it some other way. He's a guy who has had some amazing moments. Think about the guy that, you know. Think about Vitor Belfort. We look at him now, and I know that recently there were some memes online where they showed his body before this past fight and his body before other fights when he was on TRT and all that kind of stuff. But I'm talking about the way back. Think about this: is the guy that was rushing across the octagon to beat up Vanderlei Silva, and you know, think about that guy. That seems like another lifetime.
Yeah.
And so you know, it's a when I say checkered, you have to realize that checkered doesn't necessarily mean all bad. Checkered means there's some really great moments in there, and I think that the guy did some amazing things in his career, including, you know, being the guy that almost tapped out John Jones in Toronto in that first round of that fight. I mean, he had John Jones in that armbar. Would have been quite a spectacular finish if that ever happened.
But do you not view all that, you know, under this weird lens of, you know?
I don't, and I'll tell you why. It's not that
usage.
It's not that you can't. It's not that you can ignore it. You can't. It is a part of his story. But I view Vitor Belfort as something like, and in many ways, Dan Henderson was the same.
Yeah.
I view him as like a walking time capsule. You ever seen those time capsules people bury in like 1950 and then they dig them up in the year 2000? What did people in 1950 bury in this spot? And it'll be just sort of like artifacts from that era. He is the era of MMA he came up in the last 20 years. He's the area of Brazilians surging out to the front of mixed martial arts. He's the area of, or the part of mixed martial arts that bloomed to some extent in the UK and in Japan and in Brazil and in the United States. And he's part of that TRT era, and he's part of the lax commission regulating era. He is a reflection of the era in which he came from, albeit through, I think, a Brazilian prism. He's also a reminder that the current generation of Brazilian athletes who are very, very talented, there's going to be, I think, a star power deficit. We're aging out all of the really legendary guys who made Brazilian MMA what it was. And the next sort of generation is, I don't think, yet at that level. They may soon reach it. But to me, it's like, are there negative things to his career? Of course, but they're a reflection of the time in which he competed, where he is hardly alone in those things. And we may be in a different era now, and an improved one, and we should be grateful for it. But, you know, do you want to say a guy is terrible for being a product of his time? I'm a little less hardcore about that.
In a way, he reminds me a little bit of someone like Barry Bonds, who there's always been these suspicions about, but Barry Bonds never failed the drug test. Vitor has had his issues with commissions, but it's always been like, you know, they catch him at the awards, but they don't actually suspend him, and he just stays on the sideline. Like,
he competed overseas under suspension, and he just ignored it.
And then, of course, he had that run, you know, where he knocks out Rockhold and Bisping and Henderson in the span of a year with these amazing kicks. And so kind of like Barry Bonds. And I wish this is not the case in our sport, but imagine if there was some sort of Hall of Fame. Bonds is being blocked out. Would you put Vitor in? If there was a real Hall of Fame with real, you know, qualifications, this was a serious thing, Vitor's resume is Hall of Fame worthy.
Yeah, I would, but it's complicated.
Right?
Yeah, it's really complicated. But, like, you know, here's the part also about Vitor. Like, even if you don't want to put him in for his accomplishments, you could put him in as a pioneer, in the pioneer wing.
Yeah.
Like, that's the interesting part about Vitor. There's a number of different ways he could get in, even if it's not just, hey, how good is his resume, which, again, is probably pretty good. I'm sure some people would say all the different run-ins he had, be it TRT or getting called by commissions, you know, precludes him from being included, and I can understand that perspective. But for me, it's like, I don't know, that was so rife in that era. He might have been the poster child for it, but it is incongruent to like label him as some sort of like outsider and then welcome in many others who probably took advantage as well.
I don't like policing guys after the fact in the sense that use today's rules and then police them for what they did 10 years ago. I don't think that's fair. He was playing by the rules of the time.
Well, sometimes.
To a degree. But yes, I mean, TRT wasn't banned when he was using or abusing it. Although I will make this distinction between him and Dan Henderson. I felt like Dan Henderson was a lot more honest about his usage.
Yes.
Vitor wasn't.
Just to be clear here about the time capsule thing,
I
just mean he also was a reflection of that. And he was on TRT as well.
Yes.
But it just, again, you know, he existed at MMA in a time where it was this crazy, wild, undulating thing, and he rode that wave the whole time. And Vitor is similar in that regard.
Let's pause Vitor for a second. Just want to ask you about Yoel Romero. When he came out,
poor bastard.
When he came out and said, you know, I would like to fight Anderson, but it has to be for an interim title, made that pitch, and then Anderson gets a fight, and now I'm told he's going to sit back and wait. What do you make of this all? Like, are you surprised that he even came out of his shell and said, give me Anderson while I wait for the belt? And now that he's not getting Anderson, are you surprised that he's just going back to waiting for the belt?
Well, we've talked about this on other shows about the, every time I bring up how ridiculous interim belts are, the first thing out of your mouth is always, yeah, but that's one way for these guys to get paid. And that's, that's where they get pay-per-view points, and they get all kinds of things that they wouldn't get if they didn't have that belt. Even if that belt is not the real belt, having a belt around your waist gets you some stuff. So by that measure, it makes sense for him to say, yeah, I'll go and fight Anderson Silva as long as it's for a belt. And obviously, they're not going to put a belt on the line unless he's fighting somebody who has some kind of a name and they could sell it. So that way, I guess it made some sense. And as far as now that fight is not a possibility, him sitting back, yeah, I mean, he's the rightful challenger to Michael Bisping. I think that Michael Bisping should be his next fight. Obviously, it's not going to happen. GSP is the guy that's sitting there, but I say wait for him.
Why wouldn't he do it? Why wouldn't you take a fight where you feel like you could win very easily and ask for crazy demands? There's no logic to anything anymore. Yeah. It's really just what you can get away with. All the norms, there were never rules. They were just norms, just sort of things that we, for reasons that remain unclear, just sort of adhered to. But if those are going away and eroding, why not float an idea where you can get paid and you would, we never know what could happen in MMA, but you probably feel like Romero's chances are pretty good. And just see if it's palatable. That's what matters. Float something to the audience and see if they like it. And if they like it, run with it. So if they didn't run with it, okay, but I don't blame him for trying. And if there's no other matchup that offers him that same kind of, risk versus reward ratio, then I can understand him sitting as well. To me, this was like...
So why not take someone else now? Why not push for someone else?
Luke Rockhold? That doesn't...
Too risky.
I mean, Anderson Silva is a lot easier to beat.
What a great fight, though, right?
Oh, I mean, this would be tremendous. But this is also just something to consider here. Like, I'm not mad at these guys. The fighters are... Look, we live in a world of incentives. Human beings, whatever your line of work, you are going to respond to rules and incentives. What can you do? What can you do? What can you not do? What can you sort of suggest and not suggest and get away with? Right? That's the real world. I'm not mad at those guys for doing it, but it is a cautionary tale, I think. Not so much in this case, but I don't think the fan base, like, we want fighters to have some matchmaking input. But ultimately, you can see why you don't want to give them a lot of control, because they won't often take fights where it's 1-2, 2-3, 3-4 for the cost versus reward ratio. And I think retaining some matchmaker ownership over that process is very important for the health of the sport.
Yeah, and I'm not going to criticize Yoel Romero for not taking another fight. I'm going to criticize. Well, I'm not even going to criticize Michael Bisping for taking the GSP fight.
Pretty sure you just did.
He should always take the fight that he wants. I'm going to criticize the UFC for making that fight. That's not a championship fight. It's not a championship fight. The championship fight is the champion, Michael Bisping, against the #1 contender, Yoel Romero. That's the fight that should be made. And Yoel, why should he, line the UFC's pockets by taking a fight against another high contender who can the two of them can fortify one of the pay-per-views? Why should he do that? He should get the fight that he has earned. He's earned a championship fight.
He's gonna have to wait a long time for the winner.
I love Demian Maia, but man, I just think why do you want to take this fight against Masvidal?
Oh, don't get me started on that one.
Well, that's a different...
You've already earned your title fight, and now you're going to fight against a guy, a killer in Masvidal. I mean, it's a wonderful fight and all that, but sit there and wait and make the UFC give you what you deserve.
Force their hand.
What you earned.
Right. Okay, let me ask you now about this Legends division. As we talk about Anderson Silva and Rashad at the end of his
Can I be commissioner of that? I'm a legend.
That is true. That's a great idea.
Yeah.
I love that idea.
Okay.
So Vitor is really pushing this now. Do we have any interest in this, or is this really essentially Bellator MMA?
It's Bellator MMA.
Yeah, isn't it? I thought we had that.
Not so much the the shorter rounds and bigger gloves. And I love how I was like my favorite thing that Vitor requested, more rest. I thought that is the funniest thing I've ever heard a fighter ask.
I give him an A for effort. He's really thought this through.
Those big sumo suits that they always have like a halftime at the NBA games and stuff.
I've never heard a fighter be like, we could use more rest between rounds. That is hilarious.
But honestly now, like Yama kind of played with this idea, right? That was what Yama was all about, Yama pit fighting. There is an appetite to see people that you grew up watching.
Let us be absolutely clear for any skeptic that still exists, and there are some out there. Old man fighting is a legitimate way to attract attention in mixed martial
Famous
arts.
old men fighting.
Right,
just
right.
old
Not
men.
any old. I mean,
Yeah.
not two grandfathers. I don't.
No,
suspect.
but it can't be like some run of the mill.
No.
Top
It's not
50
some
rank.
guy who washed out of Tufts 7 or something.
Exactly.
He's got to be It's got to be a Matt Hughes
Right,
or
right.
or Vitor Belfort, who they have, or Chael Sonnen and Tito Ortiz. Like, people are like, this is not sustainable. I'm like, it's pretty clearly sustainable, provided you have enough. Names. It's like saying no one likes basketball. Well, if there's basketball players, people will like basketball.
And they get old.
Right.
Eventually.
Okay, but here's the point. Like, I don't think they should change the rules, and I don't have an appetite for it. But how can anyone on earth say that this is not a market for it? There is not just a market for it. There's a great market for it.
Yeah. But okay, I'll say this though. Like, there is a market. Maybe there's not enough for an actual division.
No.
You know what I mean?
But, like, folks-
unless they were just like throwing out weight classes for these guys.
I mean,
there's actually not enough fighters.
It's whatever weight
Legends.
they can. You can do catch weights. No one really cares.
I can't believe we're actually discussing.
The first Hoist versus Matt Hughes,
Sure.
which was not exactly a Legends fight. I mean, sort of, but like not. Hoist was older, but Matt was still relatively in his prime-ish, a little bit at the end of it.
Oh, yeah.
But that was at a catch weight too, right? Remember, because one of the sort of talking points going into that fight was how insanely bricked up Matt Hughes was walking into that. I look. I mean, the rules thing is just kind of a bizarre. Twist, but nevertheless, I fundamentally think the UFC shouldn't do this, and I don't have an appetite for it, but it's there. And
Should a Bellator do something like this? Legit. Given how
Are they-
successive their other
They
Legends fights have been.
basically are doing this, except
Yeah,
that they haven't
not
been able
calling
to
it.
attract all those names. I find it. My distaste for it is that just like young brains take a time to develop, we always hear about. I have a teenager now, and we always hear about things that you have to watch out for with teenagers because their brains are still developing. Well, on the other end of the spectrum, once people get to a certain age, things don't work quite as well. Their reflexes aren't quite as quick, and things can happen where a person who has been, particularly a person who at one point was a high-level athlete, and in their mind still believes they're a high-level athlete, that person can get hurt. I think it's a lot more dangerous of an idea than regular MMA is. And I'm not just talking about UFC high-level MMA, but I'm talking about even lower-level MMA amongst people in their physical prime. So I find it to be a difficult thing to swallow, and I think in a way there's a kind of sadness. I wish that athletes, I wish athletes just found that way, that exit door. And we've talked about, how successful Georges St-Pierre was at finding that exit door. Well, guess what? He stood outside the exit door for a long time, and now he's, sort of has wandered back in.
It's hard to make this point and draw a straight line, but the one thing I'll say about it is why would that work in MMA and it doesn't exactly work in boxing, or it certainly wouldn't work in like football or baseball. Maybe it has like a celebrity all-star game.
Although there is, by the way, a new basketball league coming out, the 3-on-3 league, run by Ice Cube, where it's all legends playing 3-on-3 against
it sounds like the
Charles
pimple
Oakley,
on the ass of the XFL.
Al Harrington, some big names.
Oh, is Hot Sauce going to play on that one too?
No, like some legit ex-NBA players.
All right, whatever. You know what I am talking about.
Yes.
I think the sadness of the Knicks has gotten to you.
Yes. I'm excited.
Now I forgot what I was talking about.
I'm sorry.
So here's one thing that is sort of worth considering. It's like, what does it say about MMA that kind of thing is enduring? And to me, it says it has. I mean, look, obviously I love MMA as a sport, but it clearly tells you that there is an underpinning of the fandom that borrows from entertainment. That is why these guys can fight at like these incredibly terrible levels, and people still want to see them because it's this personal attachment. I wonder if as entertainment itself turns into a very personal experience on demand, right, the way in which that's going, which is something away from how other sports work, where there can be long and you have to be there for it. MMA is kind of situated for, and this is sort of like a relatively, tangential point, but MMA, I think, is situated because of those things that it tells us for a future of that kind of on-demand entertainment. I know it's sort of a side point, but I do think it's worth considering, like, what does it tell us and what does that mean for other aspects of that fighting?
Well, I agree with you because it's funny. You go on YouTube and maybe search something like MMA KOs or something like that, and you'll find a bunch of, maybe you'll see some pirated clips from UFC fights or some other Bellator fights. But then as you keep going down that rabbit hole, pretty soon you're watching, oh, look what happened when some when some bouncer took on an MMA fighter and outside some bar, and the next thing you know you're outside of some supermarket in a parking lot, and there's all these like guys like brawling with each other. So there's we get very easily can get seduced away from actual, real, high-level fighting into just watching people fight. I mean,
Right.
and it's really hard sometimes to make that differentiation, especially when we even watch some of the UFC fights, and if you get these guys and it's like very sophisticated grappling match, and the fans, what are they doing? They're booing because they don't understand what's going on, but you get two rock'em sock'em robots in there, and they're going crazy. They love it.
So almost on cue, here comes Matt Hughes talking to Joe Buck and says, if I could find someone who I can beat, I'd like to fight again. And oh, by the way, I might be talking to some people. And oh, by the way, the guy I might be talking about fighting once sat in the chair on your show, in this chair that I'm sitting in. Joe Buck hosts a show on the AT&T Audience Network. He's only interviewed 2 MMA fighters, GSP and Royce Gracie. Of course, as you mentioned, Matt Hughes once beat Royce Gracie at UFC 60, way back, I think, almost 10 years ago now. Here's Matt Hughes, who hasn't fought since September of 2011, who the UFC kind of pushed to retire, Dana White in particular, gave him a job, was a part of the company for around 3 years, 3.5 years, and then in December was fired. Part of these layoffs, the new UFC, WME, IMG, laid off a bunch of people. Hughes and Chuck Liddell were 2 of the casualties. Matt Hughes wants to fight Royce Gracie, it seems. I'm told he has had conversations with Bellator about fighting Royce Gracie, who is under contract, but preliminary at best. What's the appetite here? Would this be a home run for Bellator? Should they explore it? Or are we, I don't know if we're pushing it, because we've certainly pushed the envelope with some of these fights in Bellator. The reactions seem to be negative at best. I didn't see one positive tweet about this when it came out. What do you guys think about it?
People never had positive tweets about Tito Ortiz, and then he goes out there and sets records.
True.
I've been saying this on this show for years. If you only knew what you knew about Tito Ortiz from MMA fan boards and Twitter, you would think this guy was reviled. And then you go to shows, and it is completely the opposite. Sure, this of course would be a huge win for them. At the level of Tito versus Chael, I don't know. You could debate about what the ratings would be.
Yeah.
But they would definitely be above, Joe Timenglow versus, whoever at that point.
Darian Caldwell.
Right. I mean, which is, an important fight for their bantamweight division, but you get the idea. So I definitely feel it will work. The only thing for me is, and I think Jeff raised this concern earlier, God, the health consequences, man. Yeah. This is, Matt Hughes turns 44 in October, I think. He's 43 now. Hasn't fought since 2011. And in prep for the show, I went and watched his last fight against Josh Koscheck.
Yeah.
The 135 one. I think this is where Bader got choked out by Ortiz, speaking of which.
No, 132.
132. I'm sorry. Yes, you're right. In any event.
135 was Denver.
That's right. And it was supposed to be Diego Sanchez, I believe.
Yep.
And Koscheck filled in for him. And here's what I saw on that. And this is still 6 years ago. He couldn't take a shot anymore. He had been compromised in that way, but he physically looked amazing, and he could still wrestle a little bit, and he was active in that way. So if you give an opponent where it's likely to be on the ground, and Bellator could give us some kind of confidence in the regulatory process, that they had extra brain scans and extra kind of regulatory hurdles they had to clear, I guess I would just sort of say, if there's a market for it, sail on.
Wait, so what you're saying is, just to be clear, you don't hate the Royce idea because he's not going to stand and strike with him and knock him out?
I don't love any of it.
Sure.
What I'm saying is,
but if he were to fight, if he had to fight someone,
would I float the outrage balloon if that happened? Again, with those conditions, if he was going to fight anybody who could punch his lights out, no chance.
Okay.
But because him and Royce are likely, as the first fight was, take place on the ground, that feels a little bit less, I don't know, risky.
I was just going to say that you brought up the possibility of extra brain scans and so forth. I seem to remember that when the Gracie Shamrock thing was happening in Bellator, that was one of the stipulations that they wrote into the contract. I think that was the fight. I know it was one of the fights with the older guys, and so I think they did have to go through that at that time. So if they did that for this, great. I sort of wonder, and this doesn't solve the problem for guys who made their bones as strikers, but for guys who are predominantly grapplers, Matt Hughes, wrestler, Royce Gracie, jiu-jitsu, it seems like these jiu-jitsu competitions, one of them would be a great, this would be a great way to make one of those competitions rise up. But I seem to think that, I remember Gracie even saying before the Shamrock fight that he wasn't interested in doing that. I'm a fighter. So, I guess these guys don't want to do that, but I would feel better about it if I thought these guys were going out there and competing in a submission grappling.
Safer.
But, I'm with Luke. I think that this would be something that's dangerous, but you know what? These guys, what are we going to do? If they can pass the brain scans and all the tests and all the physical tests that we put in front of them, and we do put in front of them more than we would put in front of a 23-year-old, if they can pass all that, I mean, what are we going to do? Is prevent them from making a living?
You know what bothers me is that, like, and I think we'll talk about this later in the show, our colleague Mark Ramundi had talked about how Andy Foster, the head of the Athletic Commission in California, was not merely going to fine people on their bonus money if they missed weight, but that they were instituting a whole new set of rules potentially, or at least they were going to introduce some, just to have them voted on to help curb weight cutting. And there's a number of them, one of which would include on a questionnaire to have a bout approved, have you ever missed weight before and in what weight class? They don't keep track of that kind of thing. That is one small addition that might help. Here's what I would like to see. And some states have it individually. If you're over the age of 35, there is a procedure you have to meet to get a license. I would like to see that codified for 30 and 40 and even 45. And I wish that the commissions would take some direction and the ABC would push this. In other words, I wish there was a standard we could point to and say, if you are an older fighter and if you want to compete, if Bellator wants to sign these two, they have to meet the old man standard. That's what we can call it, right? Capital O, capital M, capital T, or S, I'm sorry. If they can meet that, then you could say, well, our concerns are allayed, But I always feel like, oh, what state's it going to be in? Well, what does that state say about people over 30? What does that state say about people over 35? And so it just doesn't feel, it just feels like not commission shopping exactly, but it just feels like this fight, I would feel more comfortable about it under the right conditions. So let's establish the right conditions.
And I would just add that, Bellator should be aware more than anybody the dangers. I mean, look at what happened in that Kimbo Slice
Data
5,000.
I mean, you could pick a number of Kimbo Slice fights, actually.
Sure, but that was the one where a guy almost died right there, right then and there. I mean, and that was Bellator. And then just imagine the blowback. I mean, aside from the personal tragedy of that, just imagine what the blowback to Bellator and its business would have been if that had happened in their cage. Sure. So those guys have to be aware more than anybody the dangers that they're playing with. And so hopefully they'll go in. If they do go into this, they go into it with their eyes open and realize that they're going to make money anyway. So why not make it a safe event?
My two big takeaways after watching this clip a couple times were A, kudos to Matt Hughes for at least saying, give me someone I could beat. He's not calling out Paul Daly or Douglas Leba. He's clearly saying, I want to beat someone up to make some money. Mm-hmm. Okay, at least he's, sane in that regard. He's not completely delusional. But my bigger takeaway was, this is very sad. Just 2 months after he's let go from the UFC, and from what I've told, made a pretty good living, as a UFC employee, didn't do much. It was a great thing. I give Dana a lot of credit for doing this sort of thing. Hey, these guys were good to me. I'm going to try to take care of them. I'm going to try to deter them from fighting. And yes, we wish he did it with BJ Penn and all these other guys, but cool. You saved Chuck Liddell, you saved Matt Hughes, you saved Big Nog, awesome. Forrest Griffin, this is a great thing. He doesn't have to do this, cool, it's awesome. But 2 months after he's gone, here he is campaigning for a fight. And it just makes me sad. It's so sad to see what happens in combat sports time and again. No sport, I'll put, boxing, MMA, kickboxing all together, combat sports under one umbrella. No sport chews up, spits, our stars of yesteryear quicker than combat sports. And again, this could go back to the whole union thing, association thing. There's nothing waiting for these guys when they're done. And you hope that the stars of today are looking at these stories that, as the sport continues to grow, there's going to be more and more legends looking to stick around longer, like we have in boxing for so many years. Roy Jones, Bernard, you see how he finished up. I was talking to a fighter recently about Twitch, this video game thing. And I was like, why are you doing this? Why are you so into it? I'm going to make money off this. This is setting me up for when I'm done. This is a very well-known fighter. You could probably guess who it is. You get what I'm saying? So I'm
Kali Muscle.
I'm hoping that these fighters are looking at stories like this. That doesn't help Matt Hughes. It makes me sad that he's out there campaigning 2 months after he was just, the shackles have been, removed from him. He can go out and I don't want to see Matt Hughes fighting anymore, but if he has to fight.
Do we know that he is financially in peril?
No, that's the thing. So why is he doing this? I don't get it.
Well, there's a drive. I mean, it's, these guys, really all elite athletes have some kind of a drive, but look, if you're a basketball player and you overstay your welcome, you learn that by having the guy you're trying to guard blow right by you and dunk on you. And also, you have got 4 of the guys on the court who might be able to cover up for the things you can't do. But if you're a fighter you're in there by yourself, and if you can't cut the mustard, you're going to get knocked out.
It's just the nature of the sport, because if you're a basketball player, first of all, there's 30 teams you could try to be a broadcaster for. Then there's 30 teams that you could be on the coaching staff.
Yeah, but there's way more people trying out for everything.
No, I understand. But literally, when your career is done as a fighter, there aren't that many avenues. You can try to open your own gym. You could try to be a coach or manager. How much money is there for you there? You could try to get into TV. How many opportunities? There's literally like 5. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So it's just, Matt Hughes was the king of the welterweights. He was arguably, top 2, 3 best fighters in the world 10 years ago. Mm-hmm. And it's just sad to see him campaigning for something like this after, he was getting a 6-figure contract from the UFC. He doesn't need this. Why are you doing this? Why are you putting your health at risk?
I just feel like, we don't know that he is in financial peril or not, but let's just say he was. I mean, He very well may not be. I am not suggesting that.
I reached out to him a couple times, and I see that he reads the text because it comes up. Doesn't respond. I don't know
he did that to me years ago.
Yeah.
I just gave up. But here's the point is, let's say that he is. Look, I think the NFL and these other major organizations in sports, they mitigate this to some extent through what they're able to achieve with collective bargaining and setting up different and individual actions that guys take. Allen Iverson's agent comes to mind, who tucked away all that money for him that he could only take out after the fact. But look, this is inevitable. You were saying, I hope that the current generation of fighters is watching. They're not. I mean, some of them are, and some of them will always do this. This is a condition that we have, and there are things you can do to mitigate that and to eliminate it to some extent. But we will always have guys who age out, and we don't know what to do. And the difference is in the NFL, you can give them a coaching job or a scouting job, or they might be able to commentate for their local CSN outlet or whatever. In MMA, we enable them by telling them to get back in the cage.
Yeah.
That's the only way we have to help them. And so we just sort of do that over and over again. If there were more avenues, and there's not. So this is what I mean. Like, the fact that we enable them, that's really why this keeps happening.
Bellator's in a tough spot. They need as many big names as they can get. But I feel like as a community, we have to, put their feet to the fire and say, you must go through the proper channels if you're going to sign these guys. Because at the end of the day, it's only on them. I mean, if someone dies in the cage, it's their company that's going down the tubes. It makes you feel uncomfortable. I can guarantee you in a month or so, we're going to hear a story similar to this one about Chuck Liddell. Why? Why not? You ever see Chuck Liddell at a fight when he was working for the UFC? I mean, he was literally moving in there like he was in the fight. Like it was unbelievable. He couldn't contain himself. The UFC deal was holding him back, and I'm not trying to criticize WME IMG for letting these guys go. They have a budget, and for all intents and purposes, these guys weren't doing much for them. I get it. But it's just sad to see that the moment they're free, what was holding them back is no longer there, and now they can go out.
Chuck, though, I feel like has carved out something of a post-life career. He was working with DirecTV to promote that series Kingdom.
Okay.
For a little while, he does things like that all the time, and I think he saved a fair bit. Mm-hmm. So I mean, he's got things going. I don't think anyone's. I mean, God, I hope he's not suggesting to come back.
I don't know.
I just feel like you're like, what are we going to do about it? I don't know what the answer is, but here's what I do know: it is never going away.
No, it's not.
This will always be the case.
Yep. Yeah, it's been an issue in boxing for years and years, and now it's becoming more of an issue, I think, in MMA because the stars that put the sport on the map are now at that age, and it's getting a little sad to see, but like you said, we can't stop them from fighting.
I guess I'm cold-blooded because I'm not as sad as you.
Yeah, I'm a sensitive guy.
Yes.
And I put my heart into
I don't have
sport.
what they call emotions.
Exactly.
Right?
Well, maybe that's better for you. Okay, kind of along the same lines, here's Yair Rodriguez getting booked against Frankie Edgar. We cannot compare this fight to the BJ Penn fight from January, but when it was announced, it actually was announced a few minutes after our show last week. I had heard rumblings that this was in the works. They finally pulled the trigger and they added it to that insane UFC 211 card. By the way, can I just say something about UFC 211? Talk about not learning from history. Are we not afraid? This card is so good. It is stacked, right?
Amazing.
Are we not afraid that the same thing that happened at 205, now I'm not going to compare 211 to 205, but when you empty the cupboard, there is a trickle-down effect. And it feels like they're doing the same thing all over again. 5 months later, the barrel of the gun has been replenished, and they're just shooting out all the ammunition. And then you kind of feel like, wait a second, what's happening in July for that big International Fight Weekend show? You've got 3 shows in a row. What about in June? It's just bizarre to me, no? Did you guys not feel the same way when you saw this? Like, I get excited about the stat cards, but then maybe it's the anxious.
Are there 3 title fights at 211 or just 2?
2, okay. But you got Yair, Frankie, you got all these great fights.
Yeah.
Eddie, Masvidal Maya.
212 is pretty stacked. It's okay.
The anxious Jew in me gets worried when I see stacked cards because I know that means in a couple of months we're going to see very, very thin cards.
I don't mind the stacked cards to an extent. 205 was
great.
It was an exception.
Yeah.
I don't mind the stacked cards exactly. I mind it when they make stacked cards and then one, the stacked card falls apart because of injury.
Well, yeah.
But two, that injury doesn't merely just affect that event; it affects subsequent events as well.
Sure,
so it's the double whammy.
Okay.
But let's say they get most of these fights to fruition, I'm basically okay with it.
Okay, okay. Back to my original point.
Right.
That was a complete. That was a Jew moment, if you will. Yair Rodriguez versus Frankie Edgar. At first, I was like, I don't know if I love this. You know, maybe it's too soon for Yair. Should Frankie be fighting someone like Yair? How do you feel? I feel like I've kind of made a 180 on the fight, but what are your thoughts now a week later?
I'm with you. I'm all over on it. I think that it's an interesting fight. I think that because the fight game in general, at least with the UFC, has kind of gone off the rails a little bit in terms of people progressing towards something and having that thing that they're progressing toward be there when they get there. It's just a matter of, okay, now how can we put these guys in against interesting competition? And I think that in both cases, that's really interesting competition. Yair is a brilliant striker. Frankie is constant motion, but we all know that Frankie can get hit, and he gets hit. Just every time he goes out there in a fight, he gets hit. But he's like indestructible in the end, and so we got a guy who's a destroyer against an indestructible guy, and a guy who's a precise striker against a guy who gets hit, and a guy who moves against another guy who moves. So, I mean, I think it's an interesting fight. Drawing the parallel to BJ Penn, obviously Frankie is much older than Yair, but he's still at some part of his prime. I'll maybe say the later end of his prime, but he's certainly not he's not an end of career guy. He's a guy who's still got it. And but we'll see whether the young lion is going to come up and sort of take his place.
You talked to Frankie this week.
I did.
Signs a new deal.
Yeah, 6-fight
deal.
Wow.
Hate it.
Yep. Oh, I hate it so much.
Shouldn't go more than 4. 4 should be the max.
3 and then 4 if you really up the pay.
Okay, or a term, like X amount of fights in 2 years.
Yeah.
Anyhow, and here's your gift, Yair Rodriguez. First fight, new deal.
We're no big bump in pay, as I understand it, either.
What do you think?
Well, I mean, it's hard to talk bad about the fight because you like Frankie as a fighter. If you're a real fight fan, you like Frankie Edgar. And if you're a real fight fan, you like Yair Rodriguez, and you think about their matchup, and you're like, well, there's no way that's going to suck.
Yeah.
Right, in terms of what the fan will get out of it. So you're like, I don't know how I feel about it. But, man, if you're Frankie Edgar, and this is the feeling I got from him, he didn't quite say it like this, but, like, you must feel like they're sending you a signal about what they want out of you.
Yeah.
Not in totality, but maybe at featherweight. Because, look, if he loses... and Jose Aldo wins, they still can make some fresh matchups depending on how things go.
Being Frankie.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. But if Frankie wins and Aldo wins, he's A, they don't want to make that fight, and B, Yair Rodriguez doesn't get you there anyway.
Right.
Right. So it doesn't move the needle at all. Now, if Max wins, that changes up the whole equation. I think, and I asked him, like, do you want to go to bantamweight? He's like, I'm not ruling it out. And his coach came on my show that same day and called him a bantamweight.
I know.
But I kind of feel like it's like, look, if Yair Rodriguez wins, it's unbelievable for him and great for that featherweight division, which is just full of young guns left and right. But I do think it's the UFC being like, you need to figure out where we can put you to make use of you. And I don't think featherweight is that place, unless Holloway wins and changes the whole game.
He's kind of in that weird Joseph Benavidez category now, or favorite,
totally.
Where he's lost twice to the champion. So if Aldo wins, he's completely screwed. If Yair wins, regardless of who's the champion, Max Holloway, because you can really make the case that Frankie Edgar is the #2 featherweight in the world, right?
Sure.
You can argue that.
And he wanted that Lamas fight, and the UFC was like, nah.
Which made more sense.
It makes way more sense.
For both. But if Yair wins, if he pulls, I don't think, are the lines out? I don't think I've seen the lines anywhere. I don't know who's the favorite.
I don't know.
I wonder who the favorite will be.
I would imagine it's Frankie.
It's Frankie. Big?
I don't know.
Okay.
I can't say with any certainty.
If Yair wins, do you give him a title shot? Like, should he be next? There's no one really between those guys. There's certainly no one between Frankie and the title picture. And I'm assuming Conor's not coming back anytime soon to 145. He's got other plans. So does Yair now become the #1 contender? Is he the new Cody Garbrandt of 2017, essentially going from, not unranked, but you get what I'm saying, low ranking to champion in the same year?
Yeah,
possibly.
I mean, I hadn't thought about that, so I'm not sure I'm overlooking somebody, but I would think so. I mean, if you beat Frankie Edgar, you've proven that you're a top guy. You may be the top guy, especially since the two top guys are already competing against each other. So yeah, I would think he's the one.
Shocking, but I would have to agree.
Right.
You know, you beat a guy like Frank. I mean, the wins don't come more quality than wins over him, man. So if you can get that, if you can win by stoppage even, you know, that is, it seems early, it feels early, but how do you deny him?
I mean, not that long ago, he was fighting Alex Caceres, you know, in Utah.
It was competitive.
Very competitive fight, and now here he is, potentially one win away from fighting for, I can't.
And this is all money in the bank or house money, I should say, for Yair, because if he loses to Frankie, oh, well, you lost to Frankie.
Sure.
Big deal, you're what? You're 20-0.
Yeah.
He'll rebound, no problem, right? So.
I don't even think he shaves yet. The guy looks like he's 12 years old. It's unbelievable. Okay, now it's time for our weekly update on the Floyd Mayweather-Conor McGregor fight, the mega fight of all mega fights.
Did that happen already? I missed it.
No, it hasn't happened yet.
Okay.
But since we last spoke, it seems, I don't know about you guys, I don't know if you've been noticing this, but it always feels like every Friday night Floyd does something. He either shows up on a Showtime broadcast.
Sunglasses and toe.
It's amazing. Like every Friday night he pops up.
Steve Farhood.
Yes.
It's always him and Steve.
It's great. What a duo. Anyhow, so last Friday, he's doing some sort of Q&A and he says, I'm coming out of retirement, but only for Conor McGregor. This is the fight that I want. Sign the contract, blah, 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 blah. He's very aggressive. I mean, he's making the pitch. This is the fight. This is the fight. Okay, cool. But now you have Dana White showing up on Conan, who, by the way, part owner of the UFC, right? So this is all, you know, in their best interest. Comes out yesterday and says, I don't see how this doesn't happen. All of a sudden. A month ago, he's saying, there's a better chance of me being the backup quarterback for the New England Patriots than this fight happening. He says, no way, no chance. He tells Kevin Iole, it's far from being done. Not that it's not going to happen, it's far from being done. So here we are, Dana White, the guy who we all thought was going to be the biggest, you know, roadblock to this fight happening, is actually showing some positivity, right, about the fight.
Some.
A lot. And I know, because, see, I think people mistake it when I'm mentioning this on Twitter. People are like, "Well, you can't trust anything that Dana says." Fair. If you want to say that, if you want to feel that way, that's cool. But
but that's the key is he's changed his tune.
Exactly. That's the key.
Right.
The 180 in the span of a month is pretty drastic.
Major.
Well, I mean, I took his denials as a confirmation to begin with. So now his confirmation. I'm not sure whether that's a denial.
Now you feel like it's a denial.
I'm not sure what that. You know, maybe we should believe him now. I don't know.
Is that you, Chuck? Sounds like a very Chuck Mindenhall. No, but really, what do you make of this 180 that he's taken in the past, you know, month or so?
Well, I think that he recognizes that it's something that's kind of inevitable. And also, hey, those guys need to make some money. I'm talking about the UFC. I'm talking about WME, IMG. Those guys need to make big money, and they're not necessarily going to make it with some of the main events that they've had recently or that they're going to have. And this would be a way for them to make money. I don't know whether this would be something they just have to sign off on so McGregor can go do it. Or
No. What do you think?
Promote it.
You think they're not getting a piece of this pie?
Well, no. I mean, obviously they're going to get a piece of it, but I'm not sure whether it's going to be done under the auspices of a UFC thing or whatever. But I'm sure they need to. They see that the money is there, and that's really. I mean, look, we all know this. That is what this is all about. You know, as I was driving in today before getting the train, I was listening to talk radio, and of course, it is on. I think it was Mike and Mike's show.
Oh, wow.
Well, that was your first mistake.
Yeah, they're talking about this stuff. And it occurs to me that nobody talks about this as a fight anymore. For a while, there was that conversation of, well, you know, can McGregor go in there and be? Nobody even bothers to do that. You know, we from the beginning were saying, well, this is crazy. I mean, McGregor is going to go in there and he can't beat the best defensive fighter of his age. But now nobody's talking about it as though it's a fight. Everybody's talking about it as a money-making venture, and that's kind of I don't know. I find it to be kind of a cynical enterprise to begin with because nobody even thinks it's going to be a real fight.
Yeah, I'd rather be set on fire than watch this fight. But let me just.
Not true.
Yeah, it is
That's
true.
not true.
It is true.
That is not true. You would watch it. You'll happily watch it. And you will be there.
Only if he's being paid to watch it, he has to watch it.
Let us be very clear about something.
You will be there.
The threshold of what I would watch is only determined by the legality of it. You understand? That
Listen, the moment they're both
it is such a low barrier
That fight week will be so ridiculous. At the moment they get in the ring,
I can't,
facing off, you will be on the edge of your seat.
I mean, the press conferences. Can you imagine Floyd and Floyd Sr. and you got Conor versus those two? It's gonna be bedlam. But here's the thing.
Okay.
This is my read on the whole thing. I think UFC finally decided to be in on it. They had a couple of choices that they wanted to make. Do we want to fight this thing? We might win, we might lose, but that could be an ugly battle. It could go on for a while. We're fighting with our biggest star. If we're fighting with our biggest star in court, we are not fighting with him in the cage, and that's a bad look. And we might lose and blow up all of our contracts. And those contracts state you can't do anything for any other MMA or martial arts activity without our permission. If they just grant him contractual permission, or at least don't obstruct it, that clause in these contracts is still technically upheld because it hasn't been challenged yet. They can still enforce it with, let's say, Nate Diaz if he tries to make a run on it. And I wonder if that picture, you talked about it before and it stuck with me, that picture with Conor McGregor meeting with Lorenzo Fertitta, I don't think any of that is by accident. I think they needed someone who could be an emissary with the McGregor camp, and clearly Lorenzo Fertitta is well regarded with them. And he probably was also working on the UFC's behalf, being like, okay, let's make this work for everybody. UFC wants to get a cut. You, of course, will get your cut, and Floyd will do whatever Floyd does. But let's work in tandem. Let's fight together instead of fight among ourselves.
Yeah.
And I think that is where we are now. So is the fight going to get made? I mean, I don't know how they're going to be able to deal with all those egos. We'll see if they can work that out. But, geez, this one is starting to get, in the game of Marco Polo, I can hear you in the pool a lot closer, you know?
A great analogy. I find Dana's sort of begrudging promotion of this fight to be interesting. On the one hand, I respect the fact that he's being honest, essentially saying this is a money grab. There's too much money to be made. He is actually saying...
You know what? I appreciate his cynicism.
Yes. He's saying, I mean, that's the only reason why this fight is happening, is because there's a money grab. You mentioned something about, I think, Romero Silva at the top of the show, and you said people float ideas out there, and I think that's what happened here. This idea was floated out, and every talk show, every sports show just grabbed onto it, and I think that the powers that be, in particular, the WME ones, said, we have to jump on this. This fight gets us more attention, makes us more money than 208, 209, 210, 211. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
I mean, all in one. So even if we're sharing the pie with Mayweather Promotions, but it's interesting to hear him say this is a money grab because he doesn't usually say that. And then the way he promotes it, like to me, I would just come out at this point, just be like, this is the guy. I am hitching my...
No, so you can't do that.
Why?
Because I think that...
Remember what he did with Liddell and Rampage and Pride? Now, I know this is completely different.
Yes,
that's
on the commentary?
Yeah.
You know, yes, Chuck's not throwing kicks. We'd all practice kicks in the game plan.
Just go out there and be his hype man. Why?
Because I think they still have reservations about what it will do to McGregor's brand and their brand if he goes out there and gets smoked. So if they're all in on it, they're like, yeah, Conor's our guy.
So he has
this
to
is
be...
MMA versus boxing. They don't want to do that.
You got to make it. You have to say that McGregor has no chance. Otherwise,
really,
when he goes out there and loses a 12-round decision and lands 3 punches in the entire 12 rounds and then after you reverse course. You reverse course and say, look, he was playing with the house's money. At this point, he's Bob Arum, right? At this point, he's Bob Arum.
When you were talking like that, I was thinking about Bob Arum.
No, like, he's got his guy.
Yeah.
So promote your guy.
Yeah, I think you can to an extent. It's a really difficult balancing act, which he kind of walked on Conan last night. He was like, look, Floyd's old, and Conor, and he is right about this. I've seen both in person. Conor is significantly larger than Floyd Mayweather, by like orders of magnitude bigger, okay? So there is that too, and Floyd is older and all those kinds of things. Now, whether that matters in the end, I doubt it will. But he goes, I think he said something to the effect of, I'm not saying Conor's going to win, right? But I am saying it could be the reasons to think it might be competitive. That's sort of that middle ground he's walking.
I'll say this: what interests me most about the idea of the fight is not so much the fight itself, but just all the particulars around it, like who will call the fight, what will it be promoted as? Will it be like, obviously it's not going to be UFC 213, but you know what I mean? Like where will it air? Who gets the pay-per-view rights?
And this whole thing about having
press conferences,
having in June, I just don't buy.
I don't buy it either.
They might be trying to do that, but negotiating between those two. Good luck, man.
Also doesn't vibe.
McGregor's becoming a dad.
Also doesn't vibe with what he told us, saying that his wife is giving birth.
Let me ask you a question.
Yes.
I'm going to be the question.
Okay.
Here's a question. You have 2 choices. Number one choice is you don't get to watch any of the promotion, but your TV finally goes on the moment that they get in the ring and you get to watch the fight. Or you get to watch all the promotion, every bit of it, and then your screen goes black as soon as they get in the ring. Which do you choose?
Those are my only options?
That's it. Those are your 2 options.
Not very fair.
What do you say?
Life's not fair.
But can you explain why those are the options?
Well, I'm saying that I think that the
build will be more fun than the
entertainment
fight.
of this, what this whole fight is about the build-up.
Yeah.
But once they actually start, when the bell rings and they go out there, it's not going to be a very interesting 12 rounds. It's going to be, or whatever. I think it will last 12 because Floyd's not a big knockout guy, and I don't think that he's going to take him out. I think it'll be 12 boring rounds of Conor trying to throw punches or not getting anywhere close to him. The interesting stuff is going to be all that stuff that builds up before it, all the talk, all the posturing. That's going to be.
Should it be sanctioned as a real fight, by the way?
I have reservations about it.
Right.
Conor is a supremely talented guy. He has not won 12-round bout in boxing, not one 4-round, not one 8-round. I mean, what? Like, and you're going to fight, as you mentioned, arguably the best defensive fighter of our age? That feels off, you know. It's going to be defined by, look, and if Conor lasts 12 rounds, he wins. Like, I don't mean he actually wins. I mean, there's no way to say, you know, you got paid and you lasted 12 rounds as an MMA fighter. That's like Cyborg against Yorina Bars. Like, yeah, Yorina Bars came out of that looking pretty awesome, but Cyborg hung in there. That was pretty remarkable, you know. It's something like that, I think.
But I wouldn't say that. But by the same token, I wouldn't say that Mayweather loses by by not taking him out within 12. It's almost like they both kind of come out of it looking like, yeah, I won the fight.
Depending on that.
You know what I mean?
Depending on that. Now, of course, Mayweather loses the whole, hell breaks loose. Or if Conor gets stopped, Mayweather looks really good, you know. And I think that's partly why he's taking this. This is hard for him to conceive of him losing. But yeah, I think, all those reasons are compelling.
This isn't number 47 on his resume for Floyd. This would be win number 50 if it's a real fight. And I kind of feel like the boxing historians, you know, the old guys will be like, well, this wasn't, you know, number 50 wasn't real, and it will kind of be this little cloud hanging over. It's not necessary, but it's a weird thing because I feel like they'll try to now discredit his record, if you will, because number 50 came against a guy who's 0-0. I'd love to hear, you know, if Bob Bennett is going to be, you know, Mr. Transparency and show up to press conferences, which was
Mr. Transparency.
Listen, better than any other commission. We may hate every single thing he said. At least he stood up there and answered questions, right? Would you rather him not answer questions?
Yes.
Come on, stop that.
All of it's a dishonest charade.
Sure,
in fact, he gets now the appearance of transparency when in fact there's nothing of the sort.
Fair enough. But he should, him, Anthony Marnell, the rest of the crew over there, they should have to explain why they are sanctioning this, if they do sanction it, as a legitimate professional boxing fight, because there are questions.
Under what other circumstance would they do this, right?
Yeah, right.
Almost none. So if you're going to do it under this circumstance, explain why.
Right.
They should have to go to Brockton, Massachusetts, and explain it to the family of Rocky Marciano, 49-0 Rocky.
Wow, could you imagine? Yeah. They should be sitting in the front row.
Absolutely.
Sort of like when Roger Maris' family was sitting in the front row. Mark McGuire, remember that? What a scene it was.
Except Mark McGuire wasn't having somebody underhanding the ball to him.
No, but they were sitting in the front row. His family was when
Floyd was 49-1.
Oh,
and
wow.
the one is an MMA fighter.
Unbelievable.
I mean, the world would cease to exist.
I have to say, the build-up would be fun. I don't know about the fight. I'm not smart enough to predict those things. Okay, one last thing before we go. You alluded to it. The California State Athletic Commission putting in place this rule. Andy Foster, who continues to lead the way. Our own Mark Ramundi did some great reporting as far as the story is concerned, saying that, okay, in the past, we fined you 20% if you missed weight, 10% goes to your opponent, 10% goes to the commission. Now we're going to fine you 10% opponent, 10% commission, show money. We're also going to fine 20% of your win money, and that money is going in totality to your opponent. And by the way, here's a little scoop from Mark via Andy Foster. When he put out that original article that they were considering it, Andy Foster said he went on the MMAfighting.com comments section, and a lot of the commenters said, why give the win bonus suspension or penalty, if you will? The original idea was 10% state, 10%. They all said give it all to the opponent, and that's when he changed his mind.
Interesting.
The first time something good has happened after reading the comment section on our website. Could you believe that? Kudos to you guys.
Also, can you believe that the heads of major athletic commissions are reading the comment section? That's amazing.
What do we think of this?
I don't hate it. I don't love it. I am curious to see what effect it has. If it works and it doesn't really make guys cut more than they ordinarily would, right? If it doesn't enhance the danger but rewards the guys who did their job, who could possibly be against such a thing? You know, look, I think sometimes we make these adjustments to weight cutting or any kind of procedure thinking that it's an improvement, and I don't know that this will be. I think there are some questions to be asked about that early weigh-in. Why are guys missing weight so often? And everyone has a lot of theories. But here's what I would say about Andy Foster, who, by the way, has been you guys know I don't have the best relationship with commissions. There's lots of things California has done that I don't like, but he still answers all my emails.
Yep.
Right? And I also appreciate the fact that he's out there trying. He's out there trying to improve things. He is trying to come up with ideas, and some of them may work and some of them may not, Jeff. But at least he's trying.
Yes,
This is something.
Yeah.
That was my take too. That there's something happening. That it's not just we're just going to do the same thing we did yesterday, and which is the thing we did the day before. That they're actually trying to do something new. And I also like the idea that a fighter who takes a fight against somebody who has missed weight has the potential for getting rewarded a little bit more if they go out there and lose to that person. Because let's face it, if you're cutting weight and you've just depleted yourself and you made it, and the other guy, for whatever reason, did not deplete himself enough to make the weight, and then you go out there, that person probably is going to step into the cage a little bit better shape than you are and has a little bit of an advantage. If that person wins, you should get a little more of a piece of that.
I don't remember his exact quote. I'm paraphrasing, but to me, my favorite thing that he said this past week was, weight cutting is a horrible reason to die. And
it's true.
And I love the fact that he's actually, I still feel like it's very archaic. I feel like it needs to change. And I do feel like the early weigh-ins need to be explored. Now, here we are approaching the 1-year anniversary of them. Why is this happening?
And for people who talk about how pervasive the problem is, it affects every level of MMA.
Even the
amateur,
BBC did a story on it.
Everything. It affects every level. And you can see this is why iteration is hard. It's not iteration for iteration's sake. These problems are hard to solve. How do you solve the problem of weight cutting? It's really hard to figure that out. So at least he's trying.
Yeah, he is trying. Kudos to Andy Foster. All right, we have run out of time.
No UFC London talk?
Well, you told me, actually, Luke, last week we had Alex. You remember Alex? He came in here cracking the whip, said we must be done by 2 o'clock, and I think I got out at 2:01. It's now 2 o'clock on the dot, but Luke told me before the show that he had to go.
We can't talk about our favorite fight on the card?
Okay, go ahead. Well, I was happy to talk about it, but you told me you had to go.
I'm not saying for another 15
you were in a
minutes,
big
but
rush.
maybe for another 5.
Ariel, like everyone says that I'm the guy who goes too long. Here I am, just playing point guard, John Stockton, and I get reprimanded.
Really, mailman?
Okay.
Is that what you're doing?
Okay, UFC London. One last thing, bonus question.
Yes.
UFC London, the main event, much maligned. Corey Anderson versus Jimmy Manuwa. I actually really like the card. Well, I'll say I like the top 5 fights on the card, and I like the fact that it's a fight pass card. These typically go rather quickly, and it's on during the afternoon. Best fight on the card.
Got to be Joe Ban versus Nelson. Looking forward to it. I think Nelson really shines in, shines in this one. But you can never say for sure. I think it's the 2 best guys. The guys in the main event are pretty good, but I really, really think highly of Gunnar Nelson and where he can go and what he can do. And Alan Jouban is out there proving people wrong, fight over fight for the most part. So that should be a fun scrap.
What do you think?
I thought we were done. I forgot. No, actually, I think that's a really good fight and probably is the best fight. The fight that I'm kind of most interested in seeing, and I'm always a sucker for these swan song things. And so Brad Pickett getting to fight in his hometown. I didn't realize that not only was he fight out of London, but he actually was born in London as well. So he's fighting in his hometown, a fight against a late replacement opponent. So let's presume a somewhat winnable opportunity for him. But I like to see that. I like to see a guy going out in front of his home crowd, and more power to him.
If there are any UFC executives watching this, please let Brad Pickett come out with the hat, the braces, as he calls them.
It's a crime, not
the newspaper. His last fight.
He should do it anyway. What are they going to do?
Yeah, that's true. What are they going to do?
Fine, right.
Just do it.
Cut him.
You know what he should do? He should have that silly Reebok thing that you notice it never unzips properly. Like they're always struggling with it when they're trying to take it off before they enter. Just put the costume under it, and as you walk out, boom, there it is.
I agree.
That would be great.
It would be amazing.
It's a great idea, Jeff. Walk out with the newspaper. It would be great. They need to let him do that. I really like the Makwan Amirkhani Arnold Allen fight because it's rare that we see 2 rising stars, young fighters, meet relatively early in their UFC career. I like Allen a lot. Makwan hasn't fought in a year, and just kind of, he didn't have an injury or anything, just kind of his own break. Now with SBG, John Kavanaugh in his corner, I like that fight. And I love the storyline. Joseph Duffy fighting, last fight on his contract. Surprised they gave him Reza Madadi, as we talked about earlier. Maybe not I don't want to say a tougher opponent, but typically when it's the last fight on someone's deal and negotiations didn't go great, they'll give him a really, really tough opponent. So this is an opportunity for him to go out on a high note.
Yep. Looking forward to that as well.
WSOF, you want to give me your favorite fight on that card as well?
Nope.
While we have some extra time?
Certainly do not.
I think there are 3 title fights on that card.
Can't wait.
Turning Stone Casino, Verona, New York. It's exciting.
That's where all the magic
Top
happens.
of the card right now.
We'll save that discussion for next week. If you guys show up, I'll be here. I don't know about you.
Next week?
Yeah.
God, I don't know.
All right.
I'm always here. If I
We'll
cough,
figure that out.
you know, I can struggle.
We have a week to figure that out. For now, we'll say goodbye. Thank you so much for watching. We hope Chuck is doing well wherever he may be, and we appreciate you watching as well. For Luke, for Jeff, I am Ariel. Again, thanks for watching. Enjoy the fights, and happy St. Patrick's Day.